In 2.9.8, they want us to be able to explain. So explain means you need to be able to give the reasons why this would work. So explain the rate of photosynthesis can be measured directly by the production of oxygen, the uptake of carbon dioxide, or indirectly by a change in biomass. So let's again write the equation for photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide plus water is going to give us glucose, C6H12O6, plus some oxygen. So when you have an equation, you have two parts of it. So you have the substrates. So this is what we start with. Sometimes we call this the reactants. Also we have the products. So we have these two different parts of the equation. So what this is saying, we can directly measure it by looking at these two things. By how much of the CO2 disappears. So we can look at this under CO2 uptake or consumption is a word that we sometimes use as well. Or we can look at oxygen production. And both of these two methods are direct. So these are our two direct measurements. So how we can do this is, the easiest way is to take a probe. So we have carbon dioxide probes or oxygen probes and just measure how much gas there is. But it's also less technical ways of doing it. So one way of doing it is the change in pH. So here, this is an underwater plant. And as CO2 increases, pH decreases. So that's one way to measure. So as more of the dissolved carbon dioxide increases in the water environment here, the pH value will drop, which will make it more acidic. And that's the problems that we're having with our oceans, because the carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere are increasing, which are making our oceans more acidic as that CO2 diffuses from the atmosphere into the ocean. Another way to measure directly is by oxygen production, either by counting bubbles. You can collect bubbles with here it says a gas syringe. So I don't know if you can see in this direction, but oxygen is going to be produced. And these little bubbles from this underwater plant are oxygen gas. And the oxygen gas is going to float to the top. And as it fills, you can see how much water is displaced by the gas. We're going to do a cool experiment where you can cut out little pieces of leaf. Normally I cut them out in little discs with a hole puncher. And when you expose this to light, this disc, if we put this in a beaker full of water, this disc will start producing oxygen. And in theory, these little discs will float to the top. And that's another way to measure photosynthesis. But there's also indirect ways. So these are directly from photosynthesis. So this is taken up, this is produced right away, and later on, if you remember, during the light-independent reaction, we can make glucose. And glucose is sugar. That sugar can be converted to starch or cellulose. And both of these things have mass. So as you make more of this, the plant will get heavier and heavier and heavier, and you can measure the change in biomass by simply putting the plant on a scale and see how much weight it's increased. So that's it. Those are the two ways, direct and indirect. And with the direct method, there's an additional two ways by looking at carbon dioxide consumption or oxygen production.